What if I told you that somewhere between these beautiful mountains, there aren't just scenic landscapes and historic towns, but also around 370,000 nuclear bunkers? Little did you know that Switzerland has similar gun ownership rates as the US, more bunkers per capita than anywhere else in the world, and is considered one of the hardest places to invade. All that while remaining completely neutral for the past couple of centuries. Well, except 3 accidental invasions of Liechtenstein. Actually, did you know that Switzerland also had its own aviation industry back in the day, with several factories and airfields and all the good stuff? Okay, but how do you manage to store all that stuff with little to no space to even Flugzeugkaverne? Alright, you don't believe me? Look for yourself.
In the 1950s, the Swiss government expressed the interest of having a domestically built fighter. So they made a contract with 2 private companies, Eidgenössische Flugzeugwerke and Flug- und Fahrzeugwerke Altenrhein. This one was made by EFW. Their grand idea was to have a multi-role attack aircraft with 4 turbojets mounted in, or rather buried in the wings. So in case the pilot wanted to increase operational range, he could just switch off 2 mid-flight. As if that's a very good idea. But anyway. Now I really don't want to doubt the creative mastermind behind the N20, but I think they took some liberty and some inspiration from the British de Havilland Vampire. Now, given that Switzerland didn't really have any experience with jet aerodynamics, the designers just went to work. Now, the first variant was a wooden glider type. It had the nose landing gear from a de Havilland Vampire and also had the landing gear of a Bf 109. Now, unfortunately, this one crashed, but it gave you just enough information to build the real thing. After that, EFW unveiled the N20 Arbalète. This one was actually powered with 4 turbofans arranged on top and below the wings. And it showed really favorable performance and is also marked the first jet-propelled aircraft built in Switzerland. After that, the designers thought, okay, now we got the Arbalète, let's unveil the new variant, the N20 Aiguillon, which you see behind me. Now this has the 4 turbofans buried in the wings, but it actually never took off. It only made a couple of tests on the airfield, maybe flew for like a couple of seconds, but it never took to the skies. The entire project was plagued by financial problems, copyright problems, and literally no motivation because the Swiss already had working jets. So overall, the project ultimately came to an end and the domestic fighter project never saw the light of day. Meanwhile, over at Flug- und Fahrzeugwerke Altenrhein, things were looking a bit different. You see, FFA had this grand idea of having a ground attack fighter that was capable of deployment from the more alpine bases scattered all over the country. But there was one tiny problem, because by the time FFA started developing, Switzerland was already receiving British-built Venoms and Vampires, so they had to work fast and very fast to stay relevant. So in 1955, FFA built 2 prototypes of the Mark I variant. Now the first one crashed, but the second one exceeded the sound barrier, surprising everyone. So you know, progress. That progress was even so severe that the Swiss government ordered 4 pre-production Mark II variants. After they were delivered, the P-16 Mark II showed very favorable performance and people were pretty impressed. So later on, Switzerland decided to place an order of 100 P-16s from FFA. So things were looking incredibly good. Now, unfortunately for them, one of the Mark II variants crashed, dealing a major blow to the entire project. Because 2 aircraft crashed already, the Swiss government decided to scrap the entire order and instead order around 100 British-built Hawker Hunters, because what works, that works. Now, FFA wouldn't give up so easily though, because they decided to build 2 airframes of the Mark III variant at their very own expense. Now, these variants were equipped with 2 30mm Hispano-Suiza cannons. They had 4 hardpoints for your conventional weapons and domestic rockets. It also had a very special retractable Matra launcher that launched about 44 Snap rockets at potential targets, and they were still equipped with the Sapphire 7 power plant. Now, both of these had their maiden flight in about 1960, but despite the best efforts showing them off at the Friedrichshafen Air Show and other air shows around Europe, they really had no domestic or international sales, which ultimately led to the cancellation of the P-16 projects, and with those being retired in 1960. You know, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the history of the P-16 was completely over and done. Because just a few months before the cancellation of the P-16, an American inventor named Bellier moved to Switzerland. Now, he was so impressed with the P-16, he even flew it 5 times, and he saw the potential and was utterly heartbroken to learn that the entire project was scrapped. Now, seeing the entire potential, he decided to found the Swiss-American Aviation Company. And what would this mean? The goal of that company was to refurbish the entire P-16 into a small, private business jet. This would become to go the SAC-23. Now, the SAC-23 would retain everything from the P-16, aside from the weapons, of course. The wing-to-fuel tanks, the wing layout, the landing gear, the rudder, the ailerons, basically everything, but fit for the more civil or business needs. Now, after the design was complete, he also had a test pilot, King Michael I of Romania, for some reason, don't ask me why. But Bill moved back to the US because that's where the real money was, and after the design was finalized, he began production of the Learjet 23. Now, the Learjet 23 would become the most produced business aviation aircraft in history and would set the golden standard for any other business jets to come. So next time you're sitting at or even looking at the Learjet 23 or any of the Learjet series, just know you have a failed P-16 to thank for it. Following the Korean War, many air forces around the world were incredibly worried about being completely obliterated by the all-new Soviet MiG-15. These nations would then enter a race to develop the fastest and new light attack aircraft, with France being one of the first ones along the US, Italy and Great Britain. Fast forward to 1961 and Switzerland decided to buy just a single Mirage IIIS from France. Not for actual use, but as a development aircraft so they could make their own Mirage IIIS in Switzerland as a domestic build. You see, the Swiss government had a very grand idea of having an all-in-one fighter that could be used for reconnaissance, air-to-air, air-to-ground, interception, you name it. Now, the aircraft that was to be built by MN domestically in Switzerland was designated the Mirage IIIS. Now, with the Soviet Union posing a rather big threat at that time, the aircraft committee decided that we need to have at least 100 Mirages in the inventory, without really bothering to check the price tag. Swiss engineers beefed up the Mirage IIIS to its absolute limits. I mean, they made the airframe stronger so it could be comparable of that of carrier-based planes. They had 4 physical hardpoints on the fuselage so it could be physically crane-lifted inside of the aircraft bunkers in Switzerland, because there really isn't a lot of space in there. They had all-new US avionics. They had the all-new Terran 18 radar, which allowed it to also fire the AIM-4 Falcon air-to-air missile. The strengthened airframe also allowed the Mirage to have JATO-assisted takeoff and short takeoff landing capabilities. Of course, all of these upgrades weren't exactly cheap. This absolutely skyrocketed the price beyond what anything and anyone would imagine for a single aircraft to cost. And in the end, instead of 100 Mirages, only 36 of the Mirage IIIS and 16 of the reconnaissance variant were actually built at the factory at Emmen. Now, this complete financial lack of oversight sparked something known as the Mirage Affair. So much so, in fact, for the first time in Swiss history and forever, the Parliamentary Fact-Finding Commission had to be established to investigate as to how Switzerland could so easily just make an order of 100 Mirage aircraft. Now, those responsible stepped down in 1964, but the Mirage only was in service with Switzerland in very limited numbers. Despite its very rocky start, the Mirage IIIS received several upgrades over its lifetime. For example, those strakes and cannons that were retrofitted here in collaboration with Dassault in 1988 improved its overall aerodynamics. It also received a better RWR, a chaff and flare dispenser and a better ejection seat.